high in the mountains. There was a village people had almost forgotten. Most of the houses were empty. Most of the windows had gone dark years ago. But in one small house, smoke still rose from the chimney. An old woman lived there alone, and one freezing morning, she heard a sound outside her door. Something weak, something struggling, something that should not have survived the night. Her name was Martha. She was 73 years old, and for 6 winters she had lived alone in that mountain village. It had not always been that way. Long ago there had been voices there, children, neighbors, chickens in the yards, bread cooling near open windows. But little by little, the village emptied. The young left first, then the shops closed, then the doors stayed shut. Martha stayed. Her daughter asked her every year to move to the city. "You don't have to live up there alone anymore," she would say. But Martha always answered the same way. "I still know this place, and this place still knows me." So each morning before sunrise, she lit the stove. She heated water for tea. She swept the porch. She carried wood. She walked slowly through the same quiet yard she had known for most of her life. It was a small life, a silent life, but it was hers. Some mornings the silence felt peaceful, and some mornings it felt heavier than the snow.
That morning, the cold was sharper than usual, the kind that settles deep into old bones. Martha opened the door to bring in firewood and stopped. At first, she thought it was just a patch of orange against the snow, a torn cloth maybe, something carried by the wind. But then it moved. Barely. She stepped closer, slowly. It was a fox, young, thin, half buried in the snow. Its fur was wet and stiff with ice. One paw twitched, but the rest of it did not move. Its eyes were half open, dull with exhaustion. Martha had seen foxes before. They passed through the hills sometimes, quick, careful, always far from people. But this one had come all the way to her door, not because it trusted her, because it had nowhere else left to go.
Martha did not hesitate. She stood there only long enough to understand one thing. If she left the fox in the snow, it would not survive. She turned at once and went back inside the house. Her knees ached as she crossed the small kitchen, but she moved as quickly as she could. From a wooden chest near the wall, she pulled out an old wool blanket, brown and heavy, worn thin in places, still carrying the faint smell of cedar from years of storage. It had belonged to her husband. He used to keep it folded beside the stove in winter. He would wrap it around his shoulders on the coldest mornings and say the mountain cold was different from any other cold, because it didn't just touch your skin, it found your bones. Martha had not used that blanket in a very long time, but that morning she carried it outside without a second thought. She knelt slowly beside the fox. Up close it looked even smaller than she first thought. Its fur was clumped with ice. One ear was bent flat. Snow had gathered along its back and tail. Its sides moved in quick, shallow breaths. Too quick. Too weak. "Oh, you poor thing," Martha whispered. She slid one hand beneath its body and felt how light it was. Far too light. Not the weight of a healthy animal. The weight of something that had gone too long without warmth. For a moment the fox gave the smallest twitch. Not a fight, not even fear, just a fading instinct trying to hold on. Martha wrapped the blanket around it carefully, tucking the edge beneath its body so the wind could not get in. Then she lifted it. Not like a hunter, not like someone claiming something wild, more like someone carrying the last fragile ember from a fire that was almost out. Inside the house, the stove was still hot from the morning fire. The iron sides ticked softly with heat. A kettle hummed on top. The room smelled of ash, tea leaves, and old pine boards warmed through by winter. Martha set the fox down on a folded rug near the stove, where the floor stayed warmest. At first it did not move at all. Its eyes were barely open. Its paws remained tucked stiffly beneath it. She took off her gloves and held her hand near its nose. A breath. Still there. Faint, but there. She brought a small bowl of warm water and set it close. Then, after a little while, she softened a few scraps of food in light broth and placed them beside the bowl. Not too much, not too fast. She had cared for weak animals before, a half-frozen chicken once, and years ago, a lamb that had come too early in the spring. The first rule was always the same: warmth first, then patience. For several minutes, nothing happened. Only the sound of the kettle, the wind outside, the fire settling in the stove. Martha sat down in the old chair beside it and waited. She did not rush it. She did not touch it again. She only sat there, hands folded in her lap, watching the small rise and fall of its ribs. Then, after a while, the fox's nose twitched. Once, then again. Its head shifted barely an inch toward the bowl. Martha leaned forward, but not too far. She had lived long enough to know that fragile things are easily frightened. The fox's tongue touched the edge of the water, just once, then again. A few slow laps. Martha let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. And for the first time in many days, she smiled. That first night, Martha barely slept. Twice she got up to check if the fox was still breathing. Each time it was there, weak but alive. By morning, the stiffness had begun to leave its body. Its nose twitched at the bowl of warm water. By evening, it took a few careful bites. On the third morning, Martha heard a small sound near the stove. She lit the lamp and saw the fox standing. Its legs trembled, but it stayed up. Slowly, it crossed the rug and stopped by the door. Martha opened it. Pale morning light spilled inside. "Go on," she whispered. "You belong to the mountain." The fox stood there for a moment, then stepped into the snow and disappeared. Martha told herself that was how it should be. But by evening, the house felt empty again. The next morning, she found small tracks outside her porch, and the bowl she had left near the steps was empty. After that, the fox kept returning. Not inside the house, not close enough to touch, but near enough to become part of her days. By the end of the week, it had chosen a place near the porch where the afternoon sun still reached the wall. One evening, Martha sat with her tea, looked at its copper fur in the fading light, and said softly, "Rusty." The fox lifted its head, and for the first time in a long while, Martha smiled at something that had chosen to come back.
Spring came slowly to the mountain. The snow began to melt from the roofs. Thin water ran between the stones, and little by little, the village looked less harsh than it had in winter. Martha still lived the same quiet life. She lit the stove in the mornings, she fed the chickens, she swept the porch. But now, each day felt different for one simple reason. She was no longer listening only to the wind. Rusty still came and went as he pleased. Some mornings he was already there near the steps when Martha opened the door. Other days, he did not appear until evening, just as the sun began to slip behind the mountains. He never stayed too close for too long. And Martha never tried to make him. That was not what made it special. What mattered was this: he always came back. One afternoon, Martha's daughter came to visit. She stepped out of the car, looked toward the porch, and stopped. Rusty was lying there in the sun, calm and still, as if he had always belonged to that place. "Mama?" her daughter said softly. "Is that a fox?" Martha smiled. "Yes," she said. "That's Rusty." Her daughter looked surprised. Then she looked at her mother more carefully, and for the first time in a long while, she saw something she had been missing. A quiet peace, a light in her face that had not been there before. That evening, after the car was gone and the road was silent again, Martha sat on the porch with a cup of tea in her hands. Rusty rested a few feet away, half in shadow, half in the last gold light of the day. The village was still empty. The mountains were still silent. But the silence did not feel heavy anymore. Martha looked at Rusty and whispered, "Thank you for coming back." The fox lifted one ear but did not move, and Martha smiled into her tea. Because maybe that was the real gift of it. Not that she had saved something wild, but that something wild had chosen, again and again, to return. Before you go, tell me in the comments, would you have opened the door for the fox? And if quiet, heartfelt stories still matter to you, subscribe for more.